You know how a lot of podcasts start with, like, cold opens, where it's just the group rambling on for, like, 5-10 minutes, not 5-10 minutes, but, like, for an amount of time, and then it cuts to, like, the theme song? How do they do that? Like,
did they just, clue.
Like, start recording and then ramble? Like, I've never understood that, honestly.
I don't get it either. Like, I assume it varies from podcast to podcast.
We'll figure it out. Anyway...
Oh, cut it.
Welcome to the Title Pendering Podcast, a Sonic comic recap podcast where the title, it won't make sense for a few episodes, but, you know, we'll just have to make do until then. I'm Camilla the Void, and I will be joined by my partner Vespa the Hornet in just a bit, but I wanted to add some things to the top in post. We ended up going on way longer than we expected recording this. We kind of just expected that it wouldn't have much to say, and then we would just record for like an hour and then call that. But by the time we hit the end, we hit 2 hours of the recording, so just personal preference with podcasting. It's going to be split into 2 parts. Part 1, which is this one you're listening to right now, will be covering the promotional issue and the mini-series. And part 2, next week, we'll cover the first 10 issues of the comic. We will be using the reading order supplied by the lovely folks at Archie Sonic Online. Go check them out if you want to see some fan continuations of the Archie comics. Specifically, we'll be using the pre-reboot reading order because it prioritizes release order rather than just pure chronological. So we're not going to be going, like, 100 issues in and have a go back and forth between that. We're just going to be basically going as close to release as possible. If you're listening to this on YouTube or majorsmadhouse.zone, then once episode 2 comes out, you'll be able to have some bonus content in the form of the special stage. It's a series of bonus videos that we're going to be doing as we go through the comic. This time, it will be a tier list of the characters featured in the issues we read. So look forward to that. It's a mess. We had a lot of fun, but it's probably one of the worst tier lists we've ever done. Lastly, I want to note that when setting up the podcast, we messed up and forgot to, like, configure Vespa's microphone correctly, so you're going to be hearing their microphone through a Discord call recording I did as a backup, because it's either that or you're just going to have to hear their mic absolutely blown out because we accidentally used the webcam mic when we were setting up Audacity for them. So, sorry about that. You're just going to have to make do with Discord audio. But anyway, I'll throw it on back to the past me and Vespa as we enter the recap zone. Let's start with the basics, the pre-miniseries. You know, it's a pretty interesting start. It's if you've read the Sonic Bible, you basically know what it is. It's just general backstory for Sonic, for Robotnik. It's got that weird shit with Dr. Ivo King Tobor.
Yeah. And a non-blue Sonic the Hedgehog. I guess it looks more like a porcupine, but it's supposed to be, I guess, Sonic before he gets powered by hitting like the sound barrier or something.
Yeah, he basically just runs so fast he turns blue, honestly. It's really weird when you think about it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like different in the Bible. Like I know at least like another comic we will eventually get to, hopefully goes more into it. But I just kind of seemed at first like it was supposed to be like something to go, like they both transformed at the same time. Like before I read this, like I didn't realize like it was 2 separate instances.
Yeah, I do believe in the original Sonic Bible. It is also just Sonic goes so fast he turns blue.
As you do.
Yeah, as you do. You know, you just accidentally blew yourself and all that. We're just starting off firing on all cylinders with this podcast, aren't we?
I was trying to bring up just weird ass, like, completely separate design of what Kentobor looks like compared to what Eggman or Robotnik, since it is still early US Sonic. It's like looks like a normal man.
Dude. It's the normal white guy. It's so weird.
Somehow the chaos, like his chaos machine, ends up transforming him into Robotnik, like little round cartoon Roosevelt parody that we know from the classic era.
Because he has the ROCC, and I didn't write down what it stands for, but basically it's meant to just contain all of the evil in the world and put it in the Chaos Emeralds, basically.
Yeah.
And what's really weird to me is how he becomes evil is because there's just a short circuit with soda being spilled onto the machine, and to perform a very embarrassing self-out for myself, in my head, when I was writing down notes for this, I was like, yeah, Kentobor becomes Robotnik once he spills cherry coke on the machine. And then I was like going through on a second pass of reading to get like a second set of notes that are more streamlined. Then I realized they don't mention the soda, like what kind of soda. It's just soda. And I was like, why did I get it into my head that it's cherry cola specifically?
I don't know, like how the bottle looks?
No, I remembered why. And it's because it's a plot beat that's recycled in Sonichu.
Oh!
And I was like, oh right, I just conflated the two in my head.
I was wondering, you were you realized that earlier, like when you were like rereading through the comic. I was wondering, like, I actually thought at first, like you finally realized, like, oh, Kentobor means Robotnik backward.
I'm not that stupid, Vespa. Like, I may be stupid, but I'm not that stupid.
Fair.
Yeah, no, I was just confusing the origin of Blake Sonichu with Ivo Robotnik. And I just conflated the two in my head. One thing I wrote down in my notes that's something for us to consider: how filling do you think evil is? Like, how many calories would you say evil has? Because, like, we touched upon it a second ago. Like, Kentobor was just like a 6-foot-tall white guy. Yeah. But then, like, once he becomes Robotnik, he just balloons out into, like, the spheroid man that we recognize from the games.
Yeah, it's weird. It's not even like a transformation sequence. He just like goes from getting like fried by the machine, freaking out. Like right here, I gathered the containment rings of the ROCC. That director with 10,000 volts of pure evil energy, and turns him to this little Roosevelt cartoon guy that we know and love from the classic series. It is very weird.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, like, how calorically dense do you think evil is? Because, like, as we'll get into the later issues, there's a lot of fat jokes.
Yeah, it's the 90s.
In this issues. So, like, him being overweight is a main point in the comic.
Yeah.
So, like, how filling do you think raw evil is, you know?
I don't know, it's hard to, like, it's always weird with Eggman, given how, like, they've always kind of, you know, he's like always like a hefty looking guy. He's also very agile and like strong despite his size. Like, and of course, you have like the whole joke in like the early games where he's running faster than Sonic after you beat him in like the first game's final boss. But also like later games and other media will show him as like actually pretty capable outside of his mech. So who knows? Like, it's
it's one of those nebulous things that's very up into the air.
Yeah. I feel a small thing of note that just kind of bugs me about these early comics is there's a lot of allusions to Eggman being associated with eggs, despite the whole Eggman name not even being mentioned, or even like really having a purpose. Like for a reason, like he brings up before he transforms, he asks Sonic to bring him a deviled egg in a soda.
Yeah, deviled egg in a soda.
The egg has nothing. I guess like the egg just. It might have been like why he transformed into the short rotund form, but like it's always just weird to me because like I did not even realize Robotnik was Eggman. What used to be Eggman's name in the U.S. until like years later. Because like Adventure was my first Sonic game, and like that's the first time in the U.S. they really call him Eggman. So I was just like for years he was always just Eggman, not Robotnik.
Well, the thing in Adventure is that, like, he calls himself Robotnik, but then Sonic just disrespects him and calls him Eggman. And I remember that specifically because as a kid, I would always just... Because I had dumb OCs in which my character, my recolor OC de jour, was just a shadow android, because I wasn't that creative back then. But I remember I would specifically just always call him Robotnik. Like, I would always make it a point to make sure I'm referring to him as Robotnik instead of Eggman. And then it was really funny because when it came time to take notes, I would just keep calling him Eggman. And I was like, wait a minute, no, at this point he's just Robotnik in the US. I keep messing that up. So it's just something that amused me with how my brain just shifted over the years. But yeah, it was an interesting little oddity, written by and illustrated by one guy, basically just made as promo for the games. Like, all of this is promo for the games, but this one especially more so, because it's basically just like, here's Sonic's origin story, and here's the villain, go play your Sega Genesis and go nuts. Like, it is like some, like, Nintendo Power kind of comics at this point.
Yeah, they also like feature several of the levels, but like the end, like including Starlight, one of the last levels.
Yeah,
but they still have the thing at the end, like be sure to play the game to see the full story.
Yeah, it's pretty silly.
Yeah, I did kind of like this though, like the whole game setup. Like occasionally we will see some, like at least the first few issues, like they'll occasionally make nods to the games and tell you to like play along, even though it's a comic book. It's not like you're playing like along with a TV show or something like that.
Though we did get one of the best characters in the comics. That is Porker Lewis, Sonic's pig companion.
A reference to something.
Probably.
Like it just sounds like some sort of pun name.
Yeah.
I guess Parker Lewis. I have no idea who that Parker Lewis would be. None of this ever will be brought up during Archie. By the way, it's connects a lot more, I think, with the Fleetway comics. Like, they took a lot more inspiration from this origin than Archie did. Archie pretty much does its own thing, while Fleetway, I feel like this could be, in a sense, considered like a pilot comic for Fleetway.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. The scans we had were absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
It just looked like I was reading it off of a Sonic kids meal bag, honestly.
Good way to put it, yeah.
With how absolutely horrid the art quality of the scan looked.
Yeah, it just kind of shocked it up to probably like the comic itself being kind of like a really cheap looking material. Like, even like the cover, like there's straight up creases like on it. Like you can see like the pieces of like the binding fading like on the left side of it.
Yeah. But with that, we move on to the mini-series, which, with this recap section in these earlier episodes, it's gonna be a bit looser just because there's not as much to talk about as there will be in the later era of the comic. And so we're gonna cover as much as we can, but we're still gonna breeze through. We're not gonna give an arc to arc thing right now. Because a lot of the plot is just episodic, 10 pages max, sometimes 12, sometimes 6, sometimes just 2. So it's not really gonna have much to talk about right now. But at this point we move on to mini-series issue 0, which I didn't do much research into this because I want to avoid as much spoilers as possible because Vespa has been spoiled on a lot of the comic, and I've been spoiled on a good amount as well, but not nearly as much, and so I basically just defer to Vespa when it comes to research. But one thing I don't really understand, I'm not really sure if there is an answer for, is why is there a 4-issue mini-series that starts off the comic, and then we have like an issue 1 as the 5th issue? It's something that kind of confused me, especially since it starts with mini-series issue 0.
Yeah, I'm not really sure why that is the case either. Like, there's a promo comic before this 1/4, which is basically just like the first story, like the first chunk of this issue. I couldn't really find much on why they did this little mini series thing before the proper production of it.
Yeah. My best guess is that it was probably just like the comic equivalent of a pilot test, given how separated the pre-miniseries promo issue was, that it was probably just like a test run to get like reader interest.
Yeah. And also much like a pilot, there's a lot of things from these early issues that even as early as the first few issues won't be carried over. Like some smaller things, like for whatever reason, this issue, Sally's coloration is completely different from the coloration in every other issue, and as well as Eggman's eye colors being white with black pupils, which is very uncanny looking.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. I made note of that myself. It is really weird how in the first issue alone of the mini-series, barring any coloration issues, because there's a lot of coloration issues. I have to just wonder how much they just crunch the artists, given how many times they just forgot to color Rotor's stomach or a character's pupils or whatever. But it's interesting how in miniseries 0, like you said, Robotnik has white sclera and black pupils, and then Sally just has orange fur and is a blonde, but then in the immediate next issue she's pink with black hair, and then Robotnik's eyes are just the way they are in the cartoons. Yeah, it's really weird, honestly.
And then also with Sally, eventually she's going to switch her to being brown fur with red hair. So I don't know if eventually, because we haven't gotten to that point in the comic, that if they're going to explain that, or if it's just another weird coloration thing.
Yeah. It is something that they basically marked in canon, at least, because in the second issue of the miniseries, they do basically have a rapport with Sonic and Sally, making reference to the change in the hair color. And they also follow that up with, in a later issue, a Princess Diana joke.
I don't think I can remember that.
Because it's in, when we get in the main series, issue 3, someone is just reading a newspaper and it just says Princess Die, because it's just a joke about Sally dyeing her hair.
Oh yeah, I think I do remember that. I didn't connect those two. Oh god,
it predates it.
Okay.
They would not have gotten away with that if it post-stated Princess Diana's death.
That'd be very dark for a Sonic comic, especially early Archie Sonic, to have a joke like that.
Yeah, no, don't worry. We've not gotten that dark just yet. It's an interesting start for miniseries 0. It's something I really noticed that shows that I didn't grow up with these, is that it's just kind of weird to me how they'll just do 6 pages of a story and then 6 pages of that story part 2.
Yeah.
And there's also just one shot little gag spreads as well, and I was was this released weekly in another magazine? That's what I thought initially. Then I realized, no wait, that wouldn't make sense, because it's not there's not like a Shonen Jump equivalent in like the United States.
Yeah.
And I realized it's probably just more that they just put advertisements in between, and that's why it's broken up.
Yeah, imagine like the scans and trades do not keep any like obviously would not keep ads.
Just kind of a shame, both because I love looking at old advertisements and because, man, it does just break the page order sometimes with like reading it on a PDF reader.
Yeah, it's distracting. Like it'll have like the commercial break things but you can immediately see what follows up right next on the PDF reader. Or imagine like it'd be the same if you're reading on an actual trade.
It's just more you can tell like the creases where like the middle of the comic is, and you can just tell like, oh, okay, so I'm just misaligned with reading it in book view this whole time. It gets a bit annoying, but yeah, going back to the recap, issue 0 basically just establishes all of the main entrants, aside from ones that have not been introduced yet because the Sonic cartoons didn't air yet. So we got Sonic, we got Robotnik, we got most of the Badniks, which are just, at this point, just the enemies from the games.
Yeah.
But then also the SWAT bots. And then we got all of the Freedom Fighters.
Yeah, it is. I mentioned in my notes, but it is weird to me to see, like, mostly classic Badniks. Like, some of them have slight redesigns to make them look a bit more menacing, I suppose.
Yeah.
Next to the SWAT bots, and I'm so used to those being, like, separate concepts.
Yeah, it's just a weird thing for me, where it's just a weird thing I've noticed when it comes to just contextualization is what I would say, because I was replaying Sonic 1 just for the fun of it at one point, and like as I was going through and looking at the Badniks as like they stopped just being like dumb fodder to me, you know, you just jump on them and that's it. And I was like, oh, it's Crab Meat, one of Robotnik's henchmen. Like, it's just so weird how the fact that they keep like using all these Badniks as if they're characters.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of a thing back then for a lot of these game adaptations. Like, they don't really have, like, obviously, they don't have much lore or, like, material to go off of, so they only have, like, these reoccurring enemies to really use as, like, for the most part, as, like, the villains or, like, a bad guy, like, henchmen for the main villain, much like, though if it's weirder with this, because like with Mario, at least it's like they're separate entities, but with Sonic, they always portray Badniks as just being like vessels that are like have like little critters inside them, which is never really brought up inside these comics, which makes
because like at this point, it is just Robotnik just has a crap load of robots. Like the pre-mini series went into like animals being part of it, but then like when you get to the Archie things, they basically are just robots, and that's it. Because like Eggman, I'm doing it. Robotnik literally like throws them into basically the robot equivalent of a wood chipper several times.
Gonna bring that up. And that's also the case in Adventures of Sonic 2. Like, all the robots are just autonomous without any sort of, like, flickies or critters placed inside them.
Yeah. But yeah, in issue 0, we basically just establish character dynamics, personalities, all the characters, the setting, like how Eggman just has... we're gonna just need to make a count of every time I say Eggman instead of Robotnik. But, it's like his base, the various factories and smog dispensaries basically he has throughout the world. Knothole Village, which there's just the whole point of like they can't let a Robotnik figure out where Knothole Village is. But then also in these 14 issues we've read, there have been 2 times in which a robot henchman of Robotnik has managed to infiltrate the resistance base.
Yeah, that is a good point.
So it's not exactly that well hidden, I guess you could say, but also somehow Robotnik doesn't know where it is. It's kind of weird.
And it's not like there's like some sort of like weird thing with Eggman where he has to like defeat Sonic in a certain way. He once like the Freedom Fighter's dead completely, so he really could
just roboticized, basically.
Oh yeah, like he really could just like fucking like fire up the forest or like shoot out a bunch of missiles or something. Like he has no qualms like with anyone or like any sort of like a limit. Like it's the classic like pure evil kind of like Robotnik from the '90s cartoons.
Yeah, like at this point he is literally just a cartoon villain. You could just slot him into Captain Planet and it would not be out of place.
Yeah, they lean a lot on. I did find it kind of interesting that they lean a lot on Robotnik being like a corrupt polluter type of villain, like something out of Captain Planet. So I know it's like the whole green ace-up has always been a thing with Sonic, but just it never really occurred to me, like, or at least stood out to me until later years. Like more recently, when I realized, oh yeah, it is kind of have a green message going on. It's just like it just doesn't feel like beat you over the head with it. Like, to give an example of something sort of relevant, Awesome Possum, the ripoff from the Genesis, that was like very blatantly trying to like push the eco-friendly message. But I just find it kind of funny just how they push that a lot more, at least in this. Like, even Adventures, I don't feel like they push it as much, but I feel like maybe it's just like because it's Archie, like they're pushing a bit more of a message or a moral Robotnik's villainy and the freedom fighters like Wes or whatever.
Yeah. Like he's very much just I hate fun, I hate happiness, I love pollution and smelling bad. There's one joke I really liked early on in which they just have him at his desk and they list off like the various titles he has, and some of my favorite ones are corrupt politician, puppy kicker, oil spill coordinator, and insurance salesman. As Sonic at one point calls him a bloated industrialist. It's really weird. It's kind of also just weird to me how they, at this point in the story, Robotnik has taken over the world. He's kidnapped Sally's father. But we don't get to see any of that. Like, we get a flashback, but the flashback just instead introduces Sonic's Uncle Chuck, their dog Mutsky, which I almost mistakenly wrote down as Ralph, because that's one of the transcriptions of dog barking they did. I guess I just thought he was a Pokemon for some reason.
I was thinking of Ralph from, like, Muppets.
Yeah. I almost said Ralph from Garfield, which is not right. That's Odie. It's Odie from Garfield. Yeah, I'm a fake Garfield fan. You can cancel me on that, I guess.
Damn.
Yeah, it's just weird how the one flashback we get at this point in the story that is canon, which we'll get to in a bit, it just focuses on Uncle Chuck and Mutsky being roboticized and just focusing on like, oh man, Uncle Chuck made Sonic's speed sneakers so they can withstand his super fast Sonic speed.
I kind of get it, given it is we're focusing on Sonic, so like it'd be like the closest thing to family he has, like being taken from him. But it does. I will get into it later. But like the pacing is very fast. Like I don't know. Like it just like happens in an instant. It seems like Sonic like heads off to like deliver some chili dogs, and like the next minute, like it seems like Mobius has been immediately taken over by robots.
No, there's, like, in the first panels, there was a shot that basically said that from now on, this place will be called Robotropolis. So at that point in the story, I mean, it kind of builds to your point, because at that point, Robotnik has already taken over, yet at the same time, Sonic and Chuck just aren't aware of that. Like, it's just kind of weird. We just don't focus on that, and, like, you don't necessarily need to focus on that, but the fact that the writers go into, like, here's the backstory of Sonic, and then they just completely focus on the family of Sonic and do not cover what happened to the world other than it happened and we gotta deal with that. It was just a bit weird to me.
Yeah, it's something that we'll see a lot. Like, just things just kind of... I just feel like because, like, they don't have that many page space, and, like, it's lighthearted as kind of like wacky cartoon children's fluff, but at the same time still tries to go for a sort of higher stakes. But yeah, also another thing of note, another thing we'll get into as we read through these early issues is the weird way roboticization is handled in these first couple issues. Like in this issue, it's portrayed more just like the kind of brainwashing hypnotism.
Yeah,
which.
It's just kind of weird how what roboticization is just changes throughout. Because like we have that here where it's basically just hypnotism, and then in miniseries 3, we have Sonic just put on a fucking reverse bear trap from Saw and then put like red swirly contacts. And it's like, oh man. I fell into a roboticizer, Robotnik. Now let me hang out with you. And then like later on, even further, when we get to main series 3, the roboticizer like seems to actually like full on turn you into robots.
Yeah.
And then it gets like fully like fleshed out as just being that when we get to main series 6. And I think it's interesting in that it's something we'll just cover as we go along, but you could tell what the idea of roboticization is just gradually shifted as you approach the point in which the cartoons came out.
Yeah.
As with did a lot of Archie Sonic basically just gradually shifted as the cartoons came out.
Yeah. Also, to your point on like with pre-miniseries issue, I like the miniseries issue 3 with the story with Sonic like pretending to be roboticized. Like we see that Uncle Chuck is still just like brainwashed, but also Muttski's now a full-on robot dog, like loyal to Eggman. And before that, like the second issue, we have it's like jumping around a lot, I know, but like in the second issue, we see like someone has been roboticized, and it's like snuck into the Knothole base, but like they don't look that robotic. They still kind of brainwashed, but they also act like a robot and explode like one.
It's very weirdly inconsistent.
Yeah.
Also, can we just touch upon the concept of Muttski? How they're just a regular ass dog, a regular Odie ass dog, and yet we have Sonic the Hedgehog, Uncle Chuck the Hedgehog, Sally the Acorn, and all that. And it's like, wait a minute. Why do we have like hedgehogs owning dogs? And I know it's because like you're overthinking this, Cammy. It's just like Mobians and animals. It's not that deep, but it's just something that always amuses me when you're writing fantasy is that if you are making animal humanoid races, you immediately put yourself into a position of how do we deal with domesticated pets? What do they think of that? And I do just love how, like, because it's a kid's comic, they do not even bother with that.
I mean, it's basically like the Disney Goofy Pluto situation, and like even in Sonic proper, we have like the little critter creatures like the Flickies and
True. Yeah, we have Porker Lewis and all that.
Yeah, and all the little animals in the adventure game. So like it's always been like a thing in Sonic, but I do like something that did just kind of surprised me, like reading through these premium series stuff, was that I did not realize Uncle Chuck was like a thing from the very beginning. Like that's always been like one of the original characters I knew about even before getting into the comics. But I just find it interesting just how often Chuck was just given as like a parental figure for Sonic. Like in the here, of course, Sad AM, and even in Underground, they have him as like closest thing as Sonic's parental figure.
And also even in, to like a weird stretchy extent, there is just also an Uncle Chuck in Sonic X, and like I didn't even realize that until like we were watching Sonic X as part of like a friend group watching old TV shows, but it was just like, wait a minute, that guy's name's Uncle Chuck. There is just an Uncle Chuck in like each like Sonic cartoon comic continuum, to which I just really hope there is just put a hedgehog, a blue hedgehog in Sonic's life named Charles in IDW. That's all I'm asking. Just continue making him a universal constant.
Unfortunately, it broke with Boom, given that there's no Chuck in that cartoon or
can go
comics.
back in time. We can go like Superman and move so fast the world just goes backwards in time. And then we could put
or use the time stone for a more Sonic-y analogy.
If we're going back in time to change Sonic history, why are we doing this to bring Uncle Chuck in? There's so many things we could go back in time.
Hey, it was your idea.
Yeah.
That was the first thing you thought of when you started talking about going back in time.
I guess you're right. Yeah, I'm just the #1 Uncle Chuck stan right here. Ponfu Camilla, Uncle Chuck fan. More like Uncle Chuck Lover, 1998.
Alright. Should we also touch on like the freedom fighters themselves before we get too far into the miniseries?
We could, yeah. The freedom fighters currently consist of Sonic, Tails, Antoine de Coulette, I believe. I'm not mixing him up with his cartoon name. And Boomer and Sally at this moment.
Although I did not realize when first reading these that Rotor used to be called Boomer, which is jarring.
To be honest, I kind of think Boomer is a better name. Like, I think it has some weirder connotations in, like, the current meme culture.
Yeah.
But, like, in 1994, when this comic was coming out, I was like, man, Boomer is just a cool name for a cool, chill guy. And, like, Rotor's fine enough. But it's just, like, eh.
Yeah, I feel like it kind of also fits with, like, his, like, mechanical prowess. Like, I feel like it kind of like a techie guy kind of name for like the this kind of setting.
Yeah, I can get that.
But I guess Rotor does too. Yeah, I didn't really get why they call him Boomer for these first few issues. I'll have to look into that.
At this point, let's just go character by character real quick. Sonic, he's just snarky. He just snarks at you, he's fast, and he makes one-liners.
Yeah, they love to remind you that he's fast.
Yeah.
The hedgehog is fast.
Yeah, he's a fast boy. And they also just really like showing you his feet. It's something I noticed in my second read-through, is there's just so many times they will just show you his feet. And like, he has his shoes on.
I didn't pick up on
They're mainly focusing on his sneakers. But, like, they just show his feet a lot, and I don't even think it's meant to be a gross-out thing, because we do see him barefoot, but it's only once, and that's not even the focal point of the scene in which he is barefoot. But it's just like, why do you keep showing me Sonic's feet? I don't get it. I don't get it!
Because, I don't know, like, display, yeah, he's fast, something, I don't know.
You're fast, and when you gotta go fast, you gotta use your feet.
Yeah, it's like Sonic in these issues is very much like how he is in like the old '90s cartoons. Like he's the smart ass, like quippy, like goofy dude, like cool dude, like cool by '90s, family friendly standards.
90s counterculture and all that. Like, I'm the coolest guy there is, except no competition and all that.
Yeah, like, he's fine enough. Like, I just get tired of the constant jokes about, like, oh, Sonic is so fast, he can play games by himself, but he gets so bored because he's the fastest. And he gets so bored because he's the fastest thing around. Isn't Sonic so fast?
I did like the one joke in which he's shadowboxing with himself, though. Yeah. I thought that was pretty funny. Tails basically don't have anything to say at this point.
Yeah.
He is basically just the younger sidekick that looks up to Sonic. He got his own issue at, like, main series issue 4, which was, I thought it was neat. It gets undercut with Sonic saving the day at the end, which, could be just like, oh yeah, you're helping, friends helping each other out, but it's also just like, man, you really did just main character syndrome.
Yeah, there's another story, like, 2 or 3 issues after that where Tails does get to help out as well, but that's also just, I'm not a big fan of how Tails is handled in this. Like, it's probably my bias because I love the brotherly relationship from Adventure to Sonic, and that's what I tend to think of for this era of, like, Tails, where he's just like the cute little kid that tags along with Sonic and, like, looks up to him like his big brother and his family. And this, like, it's because they kind of removed that whole like him finding Tails as an orphan and taking him along his side. Like, he's just kind of this kid that hangs around with the freedom fighters and it just looks up to Sonic. Like, there really is just nothing that like
This does
Tails
not have
that
much,
it doesn't
yeah.
and it doesn't help that this is also still early American Sonics before before like the localizers realize, oh, Tails is supposed to be the smart one, since Boomer Rotor is the genius of the group.
Yeah, because we have Boomer here, and then this gets absorbed into Tails' consciousness effectively, and then Tails becomes the Gadgeteer.
Yeah, like it's just like kind of weird to me. Like again, it's not really a thing because I grew up with adventure. I just always associate Tails as being like the brains of the group, like rather than being like the Charmy or Cream, where he's like the tag-along kid.
Yeah,
which was how he's portrayed in like the first few years of like the American localized version until it became like it was too hard to ignore the fact that Tails is smart.
One thing I did like though was how they have sonograms introduced like 2 or 3 issues into the miniseries, and it's basically just write-in mail. And at one point, one kid writes in and is like basically talking about Tails, referring them to Miles because that's how they call him in Japan and in the game. And then the fucking person who responds to the letters basically was like, "Get that Miles crap out of here." It was like, whoa! I'm sorry they played and enjoyed Sonic 2.
Yeah, the sonograms are just weird. Like, they feel almost at times just like it feels hard to believe that some of these are actual like letters written in. Like, I don't know, maybe they are.
There are some really good letters, but we'll save that for when we get closer to the end, because I do have one of my favorite letters in the final issue, and I just want to save that as a little cherry on top, as it were. And that basically leaves Antoine, Sally, and at this point, Boomer. They don't have much going for them. Boomer is just the smart gadget guy. Sally's personality is she's a girl in a 90s series, so she's just gonna be irrational and full of mood swings all the time, and then also pine after the main character, which, to point out, you want to know how quick it takes for Sally to immediately start pining after Sonic? The answer is literally the second page she's in.
Yeah, it's that kind of classic 90s, like they don't want to admit it, but they love each other, but they're too stubborn to like girl versus boy like minded to admit it. And of course, you got Antoine, the French cow.
Well, he's not French yet. He gets French as of like main series 8, main series 9, because that's around the time. I think it's 10. I think it's a 10, but that's when his French accent appears in the comics, and it's like, oh, great.
Yeah, he's the butt monkey of the group.
Yeah,
like,
I've not heard that trope. I've not heard that trope in a while. Shoutouts to my TV tropes homies, dude.
I always like butt monkey is always just like my go-to phrase for these kind of characters. Like, parts because of TV tropes installing in my head, but yeah, like I'll admit first, like right now, I have not watched Saturday AM in full yet. Despite being like such a long time Sonic fan, I've actually not watched much of it.
And we might do that. We might do that as like a bonus to this series recapping Sonic lore, but it's something we'll figure out later.
Yeah. But with what little I know, have seen from Saturday AM, like, I'll at least say this, that, like, Antoine is at least much less annoying than Saturday AM Antoine, who is, especially in, like, season 2.
Because they didn't get the French coward stereotype yet.
He's just a
nag at this point. Like, he doesn't have anything going for him other than he's just the nag that nobody likes, which is really funny, because at one point, someone's like, we gotta start the Antoine Haters Club or whatever, and like the person like writing in as songs like, hey, maybe chill out with that. Like, we still like him. Maybe doing a Robotnik Haters Club. But then like, if you look to the immediate left, I think is the the one-off story about Sally bitching at Antoine because Antoine wanted to get a boat named after her. And it's like, you cannot just have Antoine being the butt monkey on one page and then the immediate next page telling the kids to maybe calm down with hating on him.
Even then, they kind of do he gets us cogs, but seriously though, they do not have any respect for Antoine, and I kind of get it, but I don't know, he's not that annoying. He's a fine enough stick in the mud kind of character.
He's just a filler character. He's just a filler character to help flesh out the dynamics between the group.
Yeah, I found it from what little I've seen of season 2, Antoine, it's certainly a step up in my eyes. He's fine enough as the nuisance of not nuisance, but the snooty guy for the group, or the grumpy dude that plays off of cool dude Sonic. And Rotor's fine up. He's the big guy and the brains of the group. Occasionally they'll have some weird referential humor. They have it everywhere, but occasionally, it makes it seem he's the oldest of the group, I suppose. I thought he was fine. He was a fun enough character.
Well, he's fine. He's just unremarkable.
Yeah.
But then as you're saying, I think Sally is when we get into just annoying characterization. There's a term I basically coined myself when it comes to criticism of these kinds of characters, in which I basically just call them personality girl. Because their entire personality trait is just the girl stereotype in any 90s, 2000s cartoon. Like I said it before, but they just are. They're always cranky, they're always irrational, they're always bitchy, they always get in mood swings, and in Sally's case, it is particularly egregious, in which she will routinely get herself into very stupid situations which would get her turned into a robot without telling the group why she's doing the things she's doing, keeping in mind that she's a princess and her dad is been captured, so she's basically acting queen right now, because at this point we don't know what's going on with the queen of Mobius, and so it's just her entire personality trait, when she's not just being heartfelt or lovey-dovey or just doing quips like the rest of the group, is that she will just be irrational and angry at everyone, and it is just so frustrating. Because, moving on to miniseries issue 1, because we don't have much else to add for miniseries 0, it opens up with, like I said, Sally's just hey, I'm gonna go see Robotnik, bye. And then everyone's oh, we gotta save her, she's not thinking straight. And then she's about to get thrown into a roboticizer, and then Sonic saves the day. Sally gets cranky and was hey, why did you not listen to Boomer? Because apparently she told Boomer and only Boomer how that she has special shoes that will get that will jam the roboticizer and also reverse engineer it so that they could potentially undo the process and save everyone, including Chuck. And it's just that is one of the worst plans I've ever heard in my life, because you have literally no field practice with it, no guarantee it's gonna work, and then you just do not tell anyone and then get upset yourself at it. And so I'm just man, you can tell this is written by men writing girls.
Yeah, even playing that aside, I just hate the trope of the sudden last minute bait and switch of oh, I was actually doing this, you idiot. Why are you getting mad? Why didn't you tell them that earlier or something? It just feels such a ass pull, pulling our TV tropes term, the last minute stupid bait and switch gag to throw the audience off. It was not really foreshadowed that well at all earlier. When I first read it, I was just going oh my god, one of these kind of stories.
It's just so stupid, because she was literally in any position where she could be able to talk to them, and so it's I'm not gonna fault her as a character, because she's just not a well-written character. It's just written by men in the 90s. It's just badly written female characters, so I'm not gonna get upset at her, I'm more just gonna get upset at how generic she's written at this point in the story.
Yeah.
There's not really much else I wrote down to bring up about miniseries 1. other than, like I said before, there's just a lot of coloration errors. It's just kind of weird. It just kind of... If I was less charitable, I would call it lazy, but honestly, I don't know what the time crunch was like for these, because, like, these were, like, released months apart, each of these issues, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know how strict the deadlines are, but it was just kind of weird. One thing I also did notice that I thought was interesting was, in this era of Sonic, before he finally made his way to 3D, it's kind of just really weird how US artists interpreted the spines on the back of his head.
Yeah.
Like, they're just, like, two-dimensional dorsal fin-ass, like, in one panel alone, I think it's in the previous issue when it's showing Sonic at the chili dog stand, he just has one fin, basically. Like, they accidentally forgot to do the rest of his spines, and so he just has, like, one shark fin, and it looks really silly. And it's also just an interesting I noticed is that you can tell when a character was made for background for the comics and not given to them by, like, Sega, because they tend to look way more Disney DuckTales.
Yeah, I was going to say, or more like a bit more obscure U.S. Garfield or U.S. Acres.
Yeah.
Or like Garfield and Friends. Like, a pig character especially just remind me a lot of like the pig characters in U.S. Acres.
Like when we have a, like, Boomer making a joke about how, like, slow other things are in comparison to how fast Sonic is. There's, like, some weird-ass joke about politicians trying to make an anti-pollution bill and how they're taking so long to do that. And I was just looking at them and I was like, man, this just looks like Disney. I feel like I'm just reading a Disney cartoon, which I guess makes sense, because, like, though they didn't own ABC at the time, like, the Sonic cartoons aired on ABC, so it's basically tangentially Disney. And then we get even further along the line with, like, Wreck-It Ralph, in which Sonic is just in a Disney Pixar movie. Is Wreck-It Ralph? Is Wreck-It Ralph Pixar?
No, Disney. Just pure Disney.
Just pure Disney. That's right.
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm fake Disney fan over here. I'm just so fake. I'm the fakest motherfucker there is.
I was going to bring up, like, there's still, like, a few things, like, with pre-miniseries issue 1. First, with, like, a small detail, like, they show, like, they have a 2-page spread that involves, like, the Freedom Fighters versus Robotnik's forces.
Yeah, the good, the bad, and the musky.
I didn't know that. I forgot about that pun, but then I did find interesting was the fact that the one and only appearance of Bunny in the pre-miniseries, despite her, like, not even having her origin story yet, like...
It's interesting how they just have so much of SatAM DNA here, despite the fact that SatAM would not air yet, because miniseries 2 talks about, like, hey, check out the Sonic cartoons Sonic cartoon when I come out, because they only mention one, and that had me really confused, because I was like, okay, which Sonic cartoon was coming out around this time? And so I was, like, cross-referencing, like, miniseries 2 comes out in April 93, and then I looked it up. Both SatAM and Adventures aired September of that year. Like, they both aired at the same time on different time slots, and it's really, like, kind of weird in that regard. And I was trying to figure it out, like, why they would just say cartoon. I don't know why they were doing that, but,
Might just been a typo.
Nah, I don't know, because it's, like, it's just weird, because, like, they later show characters from both cartoons, but then, like, it feels like they're mainly just referring to...
SatAM.
Yeah, it feels like they're mainly just referring to SatAM, and then also Adventures comes out at the same time, because there's one interesting thing is that they mention at one point, like, literally having to clarify that, Adventures is on one time slot and is more, like, comedic, and then SatAM is on another time slot and it's more serious. So it's just interesting to me that, like, they talk about, like, SatAM as just one thing at this point, and then Adventures comes out, and then that helps color the identity of the comic.
Yeah, like, the other thing I want to bring up is the other story, which... it's basically just like Sonic's fishing and end up encountering the fish Badnik, Jaws. It was Jaws.
Yeah.
I was blanking out on the name for a second.
Fake Badnik fan over here.
Damn. Encounters Jaws, who's going to roboticize Sonic, which in both with Bunny and this, they portrayed as turning them into robots, so then they'll still... It's weird. I don't get it.
One thing that's also interesting is, like, what a roboticizer looks like also just changes throughout the series. Like, at this point, it's basically just a mail chute, and there's, like, some weird joke about, like, one of the roboticizers being made in Mexico, and I was like, what the hell? But then, like, later on, it's, like, some, like, weird thing they, like, stick people in. And it's, like, it's just kind of weird how fluid the lore of everything is. And then, like, we get later, like, way later into main series issue, like, 9 or 10, in which Robotnik just has a roboticizer gun, and it's like, at some point, you gotta just, like, stick to one thing. Like, at, like, a later issue, they have, like, the roboticizer has, like, a size control thing, so you can just make someone bigger or smaller when you roboticize them, and it's basically used as a shrink ray in that same issue. And then, like, at issue 9, I believe, issue 9 or 10, I keep mixing up 9 or 10, they just blur in my head for some reason, but, like, there's just an entire plot involving a shrink ray, and it's treated like a new thing, basically, because it also has the caveat of being temporary, whereas, like, in the previous issue, it wasn't, and it's just kind of amused me, because it's, like, multiple writers, so it makes sense, but it's just funny to me how, like, fluid and inconsistent, depending on how charitable and uncharitable you want to be, respectively, the lore of everyone's abilities and creations are.
Yeah, it's very much like an episodic cartoon kind of way. Like, these early issues feel like the weird in-between of Adventures and Sad AM. Like, it still has that very episodic, cartoony, like, lightheartedness of Adventures, with, like, how it portrays Sonic and Robotnik, as well as, like, bringing in, like, villains and plot lines from that show, but still has, like, the overarching theme, like a setting and like tone. A drama of Sad AM to an extent, as well as the cast.
Yeah, it's just an interesting thing we're gonna see later, is that we just have both universes just sort of smash burgered together. Like, we just have characters from Adventure, but we got characters of Sad AM, and then we just have the tone of Adventure, but we're predominantly focusing on the characters of Sad AM. It's just really weird.
Yeah, and, like, to be fair, also Adventures, like, in the Christmas special, had a brief appearance of Princess Sally. It did have
Pink Sally, yeah.
And I think, like...
that was a really weird thing.
I had to, like, check another thing on, fact check. Some historian
don't fact check us, please. It's like... yeah, it's just interesting how they smash together both worlds, basically, in the comic. I don't have much written for main series 2, because I have 2 sets of notes, just so I could get them more clearly out. I have one that's more general recap kind of stuff, and then one that is just, like, thoughts that come in mind. I don't have any recap thoughts for miniseries 2, but I do have some interesting things of... this is the first appearance of the Sonicgrams, as I was mentioning earlier. This is the first appearance of Sally's hot air balloon, because Sally just has a hot air balloon.
Yeah, she's a princess. I suppose it makes sense.
And then we also have, from Sally's dad, a crown with the Freedom Emeralds.
Oh, yeah.
And they have... it's kind of weird, because it kind of feels like it's the Chaos Emeralds, but not. Like, it's not, because in, like, the later one, it is just we have the Chaos Emeralds as a separate entity, but we have, like, the Freedom Emeralds here, and then, like, it's just kind of weird how miniseries 2 is basically dedicated to one long arc about trying to get the Freedom Emeralds back, and it just kind of feels like it gives up on its world adventure premise towards the end, where Sonic just gets, like, 2 or 3 of them at the same time because of Burrowbot, I believe.
Yeah, it also, from what I recall, the Emeralds are also supposed to, like, help her, like, deal with Robotnik's factories and, like, help end his reign. It's
very nebulous. It basically means nothing, and I don't think we're gonna see it again.
We never do see it again. Like, after this issue, like, it's not brought up in the miniseries, and so far has not been brought up in, like, the mainline issue. So it's just like another pilot thing. But it just feels so weird because they have, like, this super, like, MacGuffin thing that they immediately get their hands on, and it just vanishes. Like, it does not matter. Like, it doesn't matter at all for the next issue of the miniseries.
Yeah.
One thing, like, about the they have a Letterman, right, that did the whole like top 10 thing. Like, they do a top 10 like things that are cool about Sonic, and like
I didn't even realize that was a Letterman bit because I didn't grow up with talk shows as a kid.
I didn't
like,
either.
It's just such a weird little bit, honestly.
It's a
that is. I'll just bring up one thing I forgot to write down is in this like top 10 reasons Sonic is the coolest comic ever. There's a lot of Marvel and DC characters just copyright free drawn in. Like, I remember seeing Doctor Doom. I remember seeing Green Goblin. It's just like Robotnik's
got TMNT too.
Yeah, Robotnik's got like Wolverine claws at one point. They make a joke about like Spawn and Batman, and it's like it's just so weird.
Yeah,
like it's songs like counterculture and all that, and like we said earlier, but it's like so weird that they're just like copyright free, but still name dropping so many other celebrities at the time. It is just so aggressively 90s in a way that was just kind of fascinating to me.
Yeah, not only that, like they do a lot of gags like later on in like the series proper poking fun at other comic books, how much better their comic is. Like, if you say so. But like they get more blamed with it later on. Like here, they just try to like hide the identity, like hide in a sense, like outright showing them. Like later ones will outright show the character. Like even have like the Green Goblin with the proper colors and all, like a group shot of other comic book villains. Like
I don't know how they got away with any of it. It's kind of ridiculous.
It also just feels very like Mad-esque to me, like that kind of like poking fun humor. But also, something that I did find very funny from the list is doesn't rely on guest stars to help boost sale, and my mind immediately went to fucking Worlds Unite, the second Mega Man crossover you'll eventually get to. Like, yeah, sure, Archie, you don't do that.
Oh, man.
We'll get to Worlds Unite when we get to it.
Oh, man.
Oh, yeah, and also, the smallest thing that I thought was kind of amusing was, the last thing is, like, we don't kill off our characters. Like, a jab at, like, comic books killing off heroes and stuff like that with a parody of Death of Superman, which
That's
I recognize, like, from,
Because I remember that. Yeah. I saw that panel. It's supposed to be Sally grieving over Sonic, and, like, I knew it was a comic reference. Because, like, obviously, it's a comic reference. Like, they're literally just making so, like, we're not going to kill any characters off, but be sure you buy multiple copies anyway. And I was, like, trying to remember what that was specifically referencing, because I'm not, like, a comic book nerd. I basically just played video games and then became a filthy weeaboo. Like, most of my comic experience was just... I was super into Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. Like, my love for Spider-Man basically started and ended there, aside from, like, a copy of, like, Ultimate Spider-Man for the Game Boy Advance.
Yeah, I just also recognize it because, like, I've seen that float around, like, when talking about the end of Archie. Like, I think it was Cyber Show that used it, like, his thumbnail for talking about Archie. I just found it kind of funny, like, to see, like, where one of, like, a meme image from, like, the old comics first came from.
And now it's basically just the equivalent of sad Mario face whenever Nintendo does a boo-boo.
Yeah, it's like the equivalent for, like, Archie Sonic, I suppose.
Yeah, pretty much.
And also, like, one last bit that, like, I thought was kind of interesting from, like, the sonograms of this issue is when they're, like, listing off, like, the stuff to get excited for with Sonic. Like, they mentioned having action figures for Sonic, and, like, well, there was, like, some toys for Sonic in the 90s in the US. We never did get any of the, any Archie characters, unfortunately, or Sad AM.
Yeah, that would have been... Yeah. That would have been really cool to have, honestly. I would have loved to have a Scratch action figure that has directly into my ear as I try and sleep.
We did at least fucking one of those fast food joints. I forget what did get a Sonic Underground tie-in, so we at least get some toys for that. Even though I think like most of them are like the only like actual like toy-esque thing like that. It's not like some like sticker slapped on. It's just like a Knuckles and Sonic plush. I think there might have been like a mannequin Sonya plush, but I'll check later. But yeah, it just bums me out. We didn't, as far as I can tell, like there was nothing for the Freedom Fighters or any Archie original characters.
Yeah. It does remind me of one interesting thing, and how there was going to be a Sat AM game at one point, and then that never came through. It would have been interesting to see a world in which there was more parody with the cartoons and the comics, because that's the thing I feel like we're going to be talking a lot about, is how it's just like, man, it would be cool if there was more crossover and parody with the games and the cartoons, but that's something we should...
And the comics.
Yeah, that's something we should just say for a later point once we get deeper into the weeds of the lore and all that. But
I'll talk about my thoughts on the mini-series stuff, but I thought it was like a fun little adventure story, even if it is very quick and resolves itself by the end.
Yeah.
Like, it could have worked with like an overarching thing for them to deal with, but
Yeah. Miniseries 3, I don't have much put. It is interesting how the story's like, yeah, we're gonna deal with what if Sonic and Robotnik were kids and lived together under Uncle Chuck, and Robotnik just tries to run over Uncle Chuck with his lawnmower. That's later. In this part, he just cuts the brake in the lawnmower.
Tractor, and gets him and Chuck knocked out.
Yeah. It does bring me into one thing that I've been thinking about that is so weird about this early run. Robotnik's just a robot. Like, he's actually just a robot at this point in the story. Like, they ditched the Sonic Bible stuff, and, like, if you pay attention to the way, like, he talks about himself and the way others talk about him, when it's not just making fat jokes for the millionth time, they do just heavily basically just say, he's a robot. Like, it's really weird. Like, I don't even know if he's meant to be, like, a cyborg or something, but it's just something I noticed, that, like, he is literally just, like, a robot man, like an evil robot dictator, and I always just thought that was so bizarre, because, like, the whole thing about his design is that he just basically has, like, a robot arm, and that's it. So it's like, is he just meant to be, like, a cyborg? Is he, like, just full-on robot, and his arm is just revealed to be metal, like Terminator style? And it's like, this is something that, like, really had me a bit, like, head scratchy, you know? I was like, why is that the case? It's so weird.
Yeah, I didn't really pick up on that. Like, I know about his, like, robot arm for, like, the Sat AM Archie design, but I didn't really think much about being on, like, full-on robot. Like, I'm sure we'll probably get more into his backstory later on. Yeah, also, something that just threw me off at the start was, like, it starts off with, like, from what I call, like, Sonic, like running from Robotnik, like, falls off a cliff and, like, starts to, like fantasize, like goes into, like, a dream state, but then it leads to, like, the page right after that has him and Robotnik fighting again, like, in a different space, and then flashbacking to them thinking about when how they first met as, like, kids, like, hanging out as kids under Uncle Chuck. Like, it's a weird framing device to get to the point of it's supposed to be, like, what if Sonic and Robotnik were friends? Like, grew up together. Like, I didn't realize at first what was going on. I thought that actually was the origin until they reveal at the end. No, it was just Sonic dreaming up of him and Robotnik flashing back to their possible childhood or something.
Yeah, it's just... I get that you would miss that, because you probably glanced your eyes over the title card because you, like me, were probably getting annoyed that they had to force in a name drop for Sonic the Hedgehog at the start of every issue.
Yeah.
Something we've not yet brought up, but every line, like, every story just starts with a way of someone saying the name Sonic the Hedgehog to, like, basically act as, like, title card for the storyline, and it is just so awkward and forced every time. But yeah, it's the, like, in that title card does just say, or, like, what if Sonic and Robotnik were kids together, you know? Like, it is, like, an easy thing to miss, but yeah.
Yeah, also, they explain how Sonic gets his, like, super speed is Uncle Chuck just magically makes up magic rings, like, it is, I guess because it's a dream, and, like, they don't have much time, like, to write down an explanation. He just, like, he's forging magic rings out of nowhere, and Sonic takes one and it gives him his super speed after Robotnik crashes the tractor into Uncle Chuck. He takes the ring and so he can get super speed and takes him to the hospital. I thought like a cute little detail is like Robotnik's building like little robot toy soldiers to follow him, and like one of them survives the crash and tags along with Sonic as he takes him to the hospital.
I never even noticed that. I never even noticed that. That's so funny.
Yeah. And of course, like Robotnik like smashes it when Sonic tells Uncle Chuck that like Robotnik was the one that caused the crash, and the robot soldier like supports him, so Robotnik crushes it, which leads to Robotnik making his like I guess first machines in this what if scenario of like various home appliances after Uncle Chuck grounds them basically.
Yeah, it's just some weird stuff. I think one last thing to say about, for me to say about miniseries 3, it's kind of weird. I don't know if you notice it, but for some reason people do just keep calling Sonic like lingo you'd expect to call like a pig. Like Robotnik calls him a miserable little porker. Like it's just so weird, because I remember thinking that was like bizarre, and I was like, did they just see the hog part in the hedgehog and assume that it's like kind of like a pig thing? Because like obviously like it's like a belabored point that Sonic does not look like a hedgehog at all, but it's like I was always like wondering like, do they think a hedgehog is a kind of hog?
I don't think they do. I guess it's just like playing off of him being a hedgehog, and they couldn't think of like alliterative or like punny names to like a nickname for Sonic to be called, so they just had to pull from like pig related names to use for him.
Yeah, it's weird, but it's amusing, honestly.
So just one at the end of like the first story, they have like a thing of, would you like to see more imaginary Sonic stories? Like this one, like, no, this was kind of dumb, and it feel like I get like, to be fair, like this still like when there wasn't really much of an overarching thing, but like at the same time, I was just I prefer to focus on the actual Sonic and Friends rather than like some made up what if scenario, especially this early on.
Yeah, I mean, I think what if scenarios are interesting.
Oh, of course.
Unless we get to, like, a later one in main series, which is just bizarre, but we'll get there.
We also touched on it earlier, but, like, the second story for the issue is Sonic pretending to be roboticized, like, the classic kind of, like, cheap disguise. Like, it makes sense for Sonic, because, he'd do that all the time in adventures, like, putting on some sort of like Bugs Bunny-esque disguise to easily fool Robotnik and his robots.
Yeah.
And to try and stop his factories and try to rescue Uncle Chuck and Mutsky. And again, as we brought up, Chuck is still just swirly-eyed brainwashed, but Mutsky's full-on
red eyes at this point. Like, he's got red eyes rather than just being, like, hypnotized, and that's it. But it was just really funny, because I was like, yeah, like, why does Sonic just put a reverse bear trap on himself? How is that gonna fool Eggman if that's not what roboticization looks like at this point? And then they basically, like, retcon it in this issue to make it look closer to that at this point.
Yeah, it's, like I said, it's weird how roboticization is handled. Like again, it can be chalked up to this being, like, pilot's issues for Archie in a way.
It's some interesting stuff, and we'll get more into that a little bit later. But I think that wraps us up for the mini-series.
Yeah.
And so we're gonna take a break, because we don't fucking know pacing for a podcast yet. We'll figure it out. We'll just scrap this shit and start again.
Much like Archie, these early Archie issues are itself. Like, this is very much we're figuring it out.
We'll just pull an IDW and just throw everything in the garbage and start over. We'll make a better podcast next time. See you later.
Yes.